Let me quickly go across to my guest joining me this morning. I have Parag Thakkar, Head and Fund Manager at Fort Capital, and a regular on NDTV Profit, Matt Orton, Chief Market Strategist at James Investment Management, and Captain Alok, Bansal, Strategic Analyst and Executive VP at the India Foundation. Good morning, gentlemen. Quite an action-packed morning that we've all woken up to, but I think while we're all hoping for a positive outcome, let's start with what we're potentially looking at as the global lead or the fallout, and what does the no deal actually mean for markets, for diplomacy, the balance of power? Parag bhai, coming to you first, how do you think India's summit outcome is going to ripple through the markets Monday morning? Where does that leave Indian investors and trade exposure right now?
Yeah, very good morning to all your viewers and you. So I would like to say that, I was not expecting that in the first meeting, everything will get sorted. So, of course, there will be many meetings. Hopefully, no further sanctions on Russian oil or something. No, hopefully, nothing like that has come up. And hopefully, I would wish that nothing like that comes up again. And they just keep discussing with Zelensky and hopefully some solution comes out. But I would say that Indian markets definitely will be slightly disappointed with this particular thing. But we had two bonanzas, right? For S&P upgrade, followed by Prime Minister Modi hitting a masterstroke on 15th August on Independence Day by saying that there will be a double bonanza for Indian consumers before Diwali. And I think that will take a center stage now in the market. Already FIIs are heavily short in the market. Market is heavily into oversold zone. So market was looking to find some positive reason, and that has come. So in my view, various sectors like FMCG, auto, insurance, cement can expect GST cuts, and market will tend to focus on them. And I think there's no big need to worry about 50% tariff because it was just a pressure tactic, in my view, to pressurize Russia to come on the table, which Mr. Trump has already said yesterday. So I would say that right now we should not be overly concerned about it. Already, after taking into account that, S&P has upgraded India.
Right, right. Absolutely. And I think that all of these news over the weekend will have a little bit of positive sentiment. So that's reassuring to hear. Matt Orton, from the US perspective, what's the message markets and allies are taking from Trump walking away without a deal? Are they also viewing it as potentially what Parag said?
Yeah, I think the markets are certainly going to look at this as constructive. I don't think anyone was expecting a deal to be reached at the summit. And I actually think it's more positive that Trump didn't just walk out of the meeting in frustration, that progress wasn't actually being made. So I think the dialogue is certainly constructive. I think from the point of view of investors, a lot of the key themes that we've been thinking about that have implications towards Russia, meaning defense investment, both in the United States and Europe and in other areas of Asia, I think that trade can continue to work because there's still a significant amount of uncertainty with respect to how this evolves. And even if we do get a ceasefire, it's just that. It's not a formal peace treaty, and I don't think anyone in the world really trusts Putin to end things exactly where they are right now. So I think from an investment perspective, continuing to focus on fundamentals, higher quality businesses where you're continuing to see earnings strength, I think all of that makes a lot of sense. And I also agree that from an Indian market perspective, I think given how short a lot of foreign investors are on the market, we can be a little bit more constructive going forward because I think there's more certainty that the tariffs that Trump has threatened will have a resolution in the near future. There's the ability to negotiate. So I think net, this is definitely a positive outcome, and we'll see how the future discussions continue to evolve.
Okay, I've got two reassuring sentiments, and we've also heard statements coming in from Donald Trump. He's had a word with US media, and he's of the opinion, and he made this comment saying that we don't have to worry about tariffs for now. But of course, given that it's Donald Trump, I think we'll have to wait and watch and see whether that's indicative of tariffs on Russia, tariffs on India, and how that actually plays out. But I think my takeaway from what you said, Matt, is the word certainty, right? And that's something that I think all of us have been holding on to. Captain Alok Bansal, from a geopolitical standpoint, is this another Cold War style freeze? How does it affect India's room to maneuver?
Firstly, this meeting has actually unended without any conclusive decisions. And though both the leaders have said that the meeting went off very well, it means nothing till further details come out. Now, there are two possibilities. One is that once Trump goes back and his being unpredictable, he can again launch a tirade against Russia, saying that probably once he realizes the domestic reaction in US has been negative or whatever it is. Or there is another possibility that since he said that only one big thing held on to this thing, there is something which Russians are demanding, which probably he needs to discuss with Europeans and Zelensky before he concedes. So if that is the case and he starts discussing it with Europeans and there is a possibility of a second meeting, it will be a huge positive from the global point of view. Personally, I feel this meeting has been a big plus for Putin and not so much for Trump, because he's really not got anything. From Putin's point of view, he's got a huge plus because he was received by US President himself. From India's point of view, I don't think so at this stage it makes any difference, because though Trump had made a statement that there'll be further sanctions on India if the deal doesn't come through. One will have to wait and watch. And I think I think India is now confident after 15th August speech by Prime Minister Modi that we will tide over these sanctions. And I think in due course, I think you will see, irrespective of whether the deal comes through or not, you will see the BRICS nations coming together more closely. Because I think if the deal would have been there, you could have seen that the recent attempt by India, China, and Brazil to forge a common front against the US tariffs may have unraveled. For the time being, I think you will see certain amount of efforts by the BRICS nations to confront Trump's tariffs. And maybe I think wiser sense would prevail in DC in due course, and these tariffs would be rationalized. And this sort of irrational tariffs that have been imposed will probably go away.
Captain Alok Bansal, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what we've been seeing in terms of developments from other BRIC nations as well. Let me quickly go over now to my colleague Varsha, who's been tracking the possible outcome that we could see Monday morning in the markets as well. Varsha, take us through, the kind of market action that one can expect and, where this actually puts India.
Yeah, first of all, on the key highlights of the meeting, if you see, there was no concrete deal which was yielded through the summit, and there was no Ukraine ceasefire agreement reached. But though both leaders, if you see, described the talk as productive, both Trump and Putin stated that they made progress, agreed on some points, but offered no specifics, and both leaders left the a conference without answering any questions. Well, just as the presidents were greeting each other, alerts went out in Ukraine about incoming Russian drones and aircrafts. While Trump didn't mention Zelensky's summit, only hinted at a future meeting with Putin. While how this is going to impact Indian market, which is a very important news. One is fundamentally nothing changes, and tariff sanctions remain same. While sentimentally, if you see, this is a neutral to little positive. Why? Because hopefully there would be no new penalties, as conversation was good, and next meeting will be likely in Moscow. The talk went well. Trump also hinted or said that there would be no need of tariffs after this meeting, but let's see how this pans out in future.
Absolutely, Varsha. Everybody's playing a wait and watch game at the moment, but of course, we're hoping for some positive sentiment. With that, I'd like to bring in Matt Orton. Matt, are we looking at what kind of action are we really looking at in the global markets? What can we expect to see Monday morning? Are you looking at something positive, or curious to understand that?
Yeah, I don't think the developments that happened today are really going to cause any significant ripples through the market unless something else happens over the weekend. And given, the volatility and the rapid nature of developments at the White House, things might change, but We're coming off of a very strong day of data, at least in the US. We saw retail sales came in much stronger than expected. Consumer sentiment continues to hold up, although maybe a little bit weaker due to some near-term inflationary pressures. But certainly the economic data on the margin has skewed more positive. We're getting reassurances with respect to the consumer. And I think all eyes from global markets perspective to the US are going to be focused on the consumer companies that are reporting next week to get a sense of how they are viewing their customers going forward. So I think that key idiosyncratic driver is going to continue to move the markets. But I think the benefit of the doubt is still going to be a follow through, perhaps to some positive sentiment. Maybe the fact we're taking a little bit more uncertainty off the table, that we're having constructive geopolitical discussions. I think all of that can have more of a positive read through as we move into next week.
I want to now also look at, I also want to now look at also the potential, while we're saying that there's global ripples, not extremely likely, but let's look at the elephant in the room, the pressure point with regards to energy security. That's also something that I think I'd like to touch upon. Parag bhai, from an investment lens, could we potentially see prolonged sanctions, meaning higher input costs for India Inc., especially in energy-intensive sectors?
No, I would not necessarily think so, because see, I'll tell you, the crude oil is at around below $66, right? And there are no talks of such sanctions on Russia, which will spike up the oil, as of now at least. I don't know if the situation worsens, but if crude oil remains below $70, it is absolutely comfortable situation. So there is no need to worry too much about it. Of course, there are some things that right now, for example, in the BPCL call, they said that they procure 34% of the crude oil requirement from Russia, but the discount has narrowed down to $1.5 per barrel, which was $2 to $3 per barrel. So I would say that, see, to replace that Russian oil with something else, definitely from energy security point of view, will be very critical and might take some time. But I would say the loss due to that is very minimal in terms of money lost by the refiners or Indian government, because the crude oil is trending downwards, and there is no such negative in this meeting which will lead to a big spike up in the crude oil price globally.
Right. But in that case, Captain Alok Bansal, India has depended heavily on discounted Russian oil since the war actually began. But with no sanction relief, do you see our energy security entering a vulnerable phase, or would you agree with Parag?
See, I think energy-wise, we are not going to have a problem unless, of course, President Trump takes any further actions, because considering the unpredictability of Trump and his administration, where one man takes decisions, and that too without any indications or preemptions, you never know what will happen. But as of now, I don't see any major threat to India. I think energy security wise, since there has been no deal, I think Russia should continue to offer oil at discounted price, and business as hitherto would continue. Now, Trump's tariffs, how long will they last, whether they'll last or not? Because one thing is very clear, having seen the Trump's tariff war, one thing is very clear, that Trump realizes that if the other country can also retaliate, he keeps on deferring the tariffs, as was the case with China. The Chinese tariffs have been deferred. So that shows, because if Trump feels that the other side is also in a position to influence US business, US economy, he is willing to make noise without any action. So maybe once he realizes that India is really not overtly worried about these tariffs, he may probably back off. And certainly, I don't think so. The domestic reaction in US is going to be very good to this so-called talks, which has not produced a deal. So he may be under pressure. One will have to wait and watch. I think with Trump, I think there is still no clarity as to what was discussed inside the room, what has been agreed to, and what was the stumbling block. So unless, of course, there is some clarity, I don't think so there is any problem. As of now, it is things as usual, and Russian acceptability globally has increased considerably. So I personally feel if President Trump can receive Putin on the steps of an aircraft, I think he would probably, it will look very odd for him to enhance sanctions or try to create more bottlenecks for Russian exports or things like that. But again, Trump being Trump, you can never forecast.
Absolutely. I think that's the general consensus that not just you, but I think the world shares at this point of time. But, really big questions arising out of this summit and whatever the outcome is. And at this point, there appears to be none. But, will there be another Trump-Putin meeting that we're likely to see? I remember we've heard Vladimir Putin saying that the next one is going to be in Moscow. But will that happen before August 27th is one big question. Does the lack or, no Ukraine ceasefire prolong instability in global oil markets? That's also something that I think we're addressing at this point of time. And no outcome in terms of what does that actually mean for India. So, Matt, does Washington really expect India to scale back Russian energy purchases? Or is this more of a signaling exercise than an enforceable demand?
Sanjana, I think it's an exercise to try and extract, a couple of items from India, but I think it's more of a posturing tool because while Trump might want to apply full pressure, even if he were serious about getting India to pivot away from purchasing Russian oil, that would have seriously negative repercussions to the rest of the global oil market. Because I know he says U.S. shale producers can simply step up their production, but they can't. There isn't the ability to take that sort of demand out of the supply that the rest of the world has. It's just not feasible without significantly causing a dislocation to the energy market. You'd be looking at oil prices probably, $95 to $125 a barrel, depending on where you're sourcing that from. So if you're in office talking about having brought down inflation, we have midterm elections coming up in a year in the US, and if you suddenly cause a massive spike in the cost of energy, which then feeds into the cost of bringing food to people, that's going to have seriously negative repercussions to the American public and your voting base. So I think it's more of a tool. I don't think it's something that he wants to or really can politically enact. So I would fade any sort of move you see that might be a knee-jerk reaction to trying to push India away from taking some of that Russian supply off of the market. And similarly with China, you're not seeing him use that so much yet, but perhaps that can be a bargaining chip as we continue the tariff negotiations. But I do think it's mostly posturing. And if you do see moves in the market that really look dislocated from reality, I think those could create opportunities for investors to take the other side of that trade.
Sure. And let me come to the heart of this discussion, which is India's balancing act between Washington and Moscow. Parag bhai, if India tilts too far one way, what risks are you seeing for capital inflows and investor confidence?
No, I would say that, see, first of all, I don't buy into this logic that this entire thing is going to hurt India significantly. This 50% tariff will also come down to 20-25% in my view, personal view, over a period of time. As we move closer to 27th August, there'll be some negative rhetoric again, which always happens in the case of Trump. But I think market understands it, and now I think so that way I'm very optimistic that plus the market setup, as I told you, people are very short and negative on the markets. People are sitting on cash on the sidelines, and 2-3 positive things which have happened. 100 bips rate cut has happened. CRR cut has happened. So RBI has done their bit. Now government is ready to step in with fiscal steps to reduce GST. So now, plus India's balance sheet macro inflation, if you see crude oil is at 66, current account deficit wise, inflation wise, fiscal deficit wise, everything is perfectly set. Only problem in India is earnings. That earnings is not coming. And hopefully after this festive season, we'll see pickup in some of the sectors like FMCG or two-wheelers, for example. The two-wheelers right now are taxed at 28%, for example. Now they can be brought down to 18%, right? Insurance is right now taxed at 18%. That can be brought down to 5% or 0.
Right.
Cement is at 28%. It can be brought down to 18. So I'm saying that at least some sectors will have tailwinds due to this.
Sure.
And hopefully this entire negativity around 50% tariff will sort itself out.
Okay, one can only hope, and thank you so much to all three of you for joining us, and giving us this comprehensive insight to what promises to be, I think, an action-packed week ahead. So thanks so much for it, a taste of what's to come, and we'll continue tracking this because while it appears that Anchorage may have no deal, I think the consequences are far and wide, and one can only wait and see how the rest of the week or the rest of the remaining weeks play out. So thanks so much for your time.